guys, it's Matt with Tips for Truckers. Got Shelby over here. He's probably going to hide in one of those pipes here. But this video today, it's about, so my friend was thinking about buying a used truck. And I wanted to do a quick video about, it's probably not going to be quick, but it's going to be about all the things you need to look out for when buying a used truck. I'm only going to talk about wear items because that's the only thing I could talk. Certainly that will have maintenance intervals. So like there's other things like eventually your water pump's going to go out, eventually your air compressor is going to go out and stuff like that. But what I'm going to talk to you in this episode, what I can tell you for sure is when wear items generally go out. So without further ado, let's go on with the list. So the number one thing is if the truck's got over 1 million miles, about right at 1 million miles, between 800, 700 and 1 million miles, you're going to want an end frame. And what's an end frame? Basically, they also call it a rebuild, but a rebuild is not that specific. They call it an end frame because they're replacing all the internals of the engine, the bottom end, but they're keeping the engine inside the frame, mounted and everything. They drop the oil pan, they drop the pistons, the crankshaft, they replace all the bearings. So you're getting new pistons and rods, new wrist pins, bearings, piston rings, cylinder liners or piston liners. Because what happens is with a diesel engine, now it lasts a long time, but eventually you get what's called crankcase pressure or blow-by. And what that means is the piston rings from going up and down for 1 million miles get worn out, the cylinder walls get worn out from all that scraping, and then oil comes through there and goes into the combustion chamber. So you're burning a bunch of oil, but it's not just about burning the oil that's bad. You're also getting oil into the combustion chamber. So you only want fuel and air in there. So you'll really lose a lot of efficiency if you do it that way. So that's the first thing. You're gonna want an end frame, and they'll also replace the head gasket too, because you got to take the head off to install the pistons. So, and like I said, all the bearings, pistons, rods. You usually don't change the crankshaft, the head gasket. Probably have to replace the head bolts, and rod bolts and stuff like that. And cylinder liners, like I said. Because in a diesel engine, they have the engine block, and then they got each cylinder has its own line, and you can slip out and put back in to replace. And that's why they last millions of miles. But anyway, let's move on. All right, number two thing you need to look out for, and that's a new turbo at about 1 million miles as well. Maybe 700, something like that. There's two things with a turbo that you got to watch out for. The number one thing with a turbo is the oil seals will go bad in a turbo. And the problem with that is not that you're just going to lose oil, but the oil is going to leak into your intake and it's going to go into the engine. I already explained earlier why that's bad. So you got that, and like I said, you're also going to be losing oil, which you don't want to be doing. But here's the other thing, the biggest thing that you don't want happening with your turbo is you don't want a turbo bearing failure, because the turbo, it spins at like 10,000 RPM, and so that little bearing inside, if it's not properly lubricated or gets worn out, eventually it's going to get worn out and it's going to give, and then your whole turbo compressor wheel is going to bounce all around. Little chunks, you're going to get chunks in the oil, you're going to get chunks in the engine, you're going to get chunks in the combustion chambers, and it's not going to be pretty. So 700 to a million miles, you're gonna want a new turbo, or at least a rebuilt turbo. I would recommend going with a whole new one. That way you have different bearings, all new stuff. But you can take it out and rebuild it and still use the housing. But it's probably worth the extra couple $100 for a whole brand new turbo. All right, that brings me on to number 3, and this is only if you have a manual transmission. That's the clutch. Now, a clutch is very dependent. This is the number one thing that's dependent on how the driver drives it. A clutch, if you got someone who releases it real quick, you know, doesn't ease on and off the throttle when shifting gears, floating, double clutches, does anything like that. Not floating, but, you know, it doesn't ease off on and off the throttle when floating the gears. Your clutch is going to get worn out in probably about 500,000, 500,000 miles. But if you're gentle with it, a clutch could probably last about 700. If you got more than 700 on the truck, I would just replace the clutch, save you a tow bill on the road. It's going to be about $3,000, $4,000 to get it done in the shop. Well worth the money, so that it's off your mind and everything. And while you replace the clutch, you may want to change the throwout bearing if it's got 1,000,000 miles on it. I would. It's going to be another couple $100 or so, several $100. But it's just, while you got it apart, you might as well, you know what I mean? And you got the flywheel too, which clutch connects with. Actually, trucks have 2 clutches. They have a twin disc, and then they have the intermediate plate in between. But obviously, they're going to change both clutch discs. And maybe I'll do a video about why it has two discs. I don't want to get that in depth in this video. Oh, but the flywheel probably needs to be changed out every other clutch. If you go through 2 clutches, let's say you got 1.2 million miles, and you're gonna put your second clutch in, I would replace the flywheel as well, just because you got it out. And probably put brand new clutch bolts, because those are torqued to a specific torque, and they probably stretch. Number 4, I'm going to lump a bunch of things together in this number 4. Around 500,000. I would recommend all belts, all hoses, radiator hoses, any rubber hose should be replaced. Any critical rubber hose, EGR cooler hose, that's probably going to start cracking and leaking, and that's going to give you a whole bunch of trouble. Any rubber hose, any rubber belt, anything like that, just go ahead and change them. 500,000 miles or so, make sure they're changed out if you're buying a truck with more miles than that. Yeah, anything rubber. Oh, with the one exception, a lot of these new trucks are using silicone hoses. Silicone hoses, they say, will last a lifetime. I don't know 100% about that. I would trust them. Maybe at 1,000,000 miles, you'll still want to change out the silicone hoses. But if you're going to change them out, maybe upgrade to silicone if you feel like spending the extra money. Number 5, and this is a big thing that people will overlook and don't think about. That's the fan clutch. Now, everybody thinks that the fan just flips on normally, you know, just engages. It doesn't. There's actually a small clutch in there. It's a centrifugal clutch, and it's also a thermal clutch. So it's so when it hits a certain temperature, it'll kick on. But you can also manually override it. That's another thing to look for. If you're ever buying a truck, period, always look for a manual override fan switch. It'll always come on automatically, but you might want to cool down the engine before you hit a big hill, or if it's really hot, you might want to get the engine cooled down before you hit a big hill or something like that. just be nice to have that manual override switch. It'll also help you when you're going downhill, slow you down just a little bit. But fan clutch for sure probably needs to be changed after 600,000-700,000 miles, because you're going to need to be towed if it's not. You don't want to drive it without a fan. Let me tell you. So it'll be towed. That's about a $1,500 job right there, just to change it out. You know, like I said, if it's got 600, 700, go ahead and change it out. But that's not something that you got to look for if you're getting a used truck. Fan clutch. Number six. And this is one thing that a lot of people really don't think needs to ever be changed until they start leaking, and that's the axle seal. But let me tell you what, the axle seals, you're going to want to replace them after about 500,000. Because that's not something that you want, you know, leaking, your axle's leaking, because you can't, there's no dipstick for them. You can't tell the level. And so if they start leaking a little bit, you know, you don't know, might as well just be sure. Now, the bearings should last the lifetime of the truck. With the axle seal, so the bearings absorb some of the bump, and there's a lot of vibration. And when that rubber expands and contracts, it wears out. And also heat and just time dries out rubber, and seals will start leaking. I'd recommend, if you're doing the maintenance yourself, spend a day, do all 6 axle seals, inner and outer. I've noticed they start leaking around 500,000, and the inner and outer, I haven't noticed which one leaks first, but just change them both, I'd recommend. Or if you're buying a new truck, ask if they've been changed. And that's really the main things. I mean, air conditioner is eventually going to wear out. All that is eventually going to wear out. Different things like shocks, they should be changed regular intervals. Obviously, your tires need to be good. But I feel like that stuff is just common sense stuff. And also, like I said, I'm just focusing on wear items that wear out within a specific amount of time that are actually going to put you out of commission, make you have a tow bill or whatever if you break down, which is not what you want after you just spent a bunch of money on a brand used truck. Let me tell you. So that's pretty much it for this video, but definitely watch out for those 6 things if you're buying a used truck, or if your truck's getting up there in miles. It's Matt with Tips for Truckers. Have a great day. And a bonus, every 200,000 to 300,000 miles, you're going to want your valves adjusted. Make sure they're opening and closing all the way. After it goes through a bunch of heat cycles, especially within the first 200,000, you're going to want those valves adjusted. Make sure they're opening and closing all the way, and that'll really help your fuel mileage. It's not that much labor, and it's 0 parts, besides probably a valve cover gasket, maybe. Depends on how many. I mean, it's a what, $20 part maybe. But it'd probably be like an hour's worth of labor or so to adjust the valves. That's a good thing to think about doing. Not super necessary, but if you want a real good running truck, then adjust the valves every now and then.